Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome back, Honors, to your, oh man, what is this, like fourth, fifth flip or something like that? We get up to like 50-something by the end of the year, so we're going to go ahead and get started and chipping away on that number, though, right now, because we're going to pick up kind of where we left off in class, right? So where we left off in class, we were talking about the fall of the Egyptians, right? Now, it's silly to act like the Egyptians fell away forever and then just disappeared, right? Because as we know, the Egyptians have a storied history. They have a very, very intense lifespan. They have a very, very long-standing culture that permeates all kinds of stuff throughout our society. For example, we still make movies that are actually set in Egyptian-like lands. We still make stories and hear stories of like, oh, Tom Cruise has that Mummy movie coming out. Like you are connected to this in a lot of ways. In religion class, you talk about your Exodus story. The culture of the ancient Egyptians is going to permeate through time, right? But the thing about it is because of their fall, a couple of these different groups are actually going to show up and really, really kind of rock the foundations of everything, though. And you're going to end up with a lot of smaller kingdoms from the east, okay? So the Egyptians were one of two great powers at the time, right? You had Mesopotamia and you had Egypt, okay? Now, as we know, Mesopotamia is a word that we use to refer to any of the many, many, many fertile crescent city-states, including Samaria, Acadia, Babylon, Neo-Babylon, and Assyria. And Egypt, of course, is referring to their large Nile-based river valley. However, they each, if you could tell, came up with a bunch of amazing stuff. And they also are genuinely very different from one another, right? One of them came up with a syllabic structure writing known as cuneiform. The other one came up with a pictographic form of writing known as hieroglyphics. There are cultures in government, right? One city-states, one centralized. There are cultures of religion, one fearing their river, one loving their river, right? The easeability of agriculture, one to the other. So they're very two large powers that existed around the same time, but they did things wildly differently, right? So just remember that, because it could be like maybe a short answer question on the test. Could be a short answer question on the test. I don't know. Maybe. Now, the big thing, though, also, is that as Egypt began to fall in their third intermediate period, they lost their law systems. They lost their wealth. Their centralized government collapsed after the Hittite invasion, right? And after all of these invasions, Egypt was left poor and powerless. Now, really quickly, though, this is also due to an event known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, right? So do me a favor right quick and just put Late Bronze Age collapse, because I don't know if you know this or not, but ever since the Egyptians were actually with the Hyksos, and the Hyksos took over the upper area of Egypt and also took their capital, Memphis, the Hyksos demonstrated and ended up showing the Egyptians through cultural diffusion how to wield bronze metal, right? Now, bronze is a simple combination of iron and tin, or not iron and tin, copper and tin, and we'll get back to that stuff here in a little bit longer when we get into our next unit. But the big thing that ends up happening is right around the same time, the Mesopotamian empires, the Hittite empire, the Egyptian empire, all of these very, very large areas, also the Mycenaeans over in Greece, they kind of went through a period of crumble, right? They just kind of went, and we don't know every single reason why this happened. We do know at the very beginning of the Late Bronze Age collapse, the Hittites invaded the Egyptians, diffusing a lot of new ideas into them and also rocking their government. But then the Late Bronze Age hit and bam, like everybody was affected, the Hittites included, right? So during this moment, everything was kind of really, really sunk down to a new low, and no one was able to really, really kind of crawl out or become what they once were. So the thing about it was, after the Late Bronze Age collapse, Egypt, you would think, would just have a chance to maybe reassert itself, come back to power. But their biggest problem was there was a huge amount of groups looking to live on their land, right? Just like the Hyksos showed up in the second intermediate period, the Cushites, the Libyans, the Nubians, and these other different groups wanted to settle in the Nile River Valley. And since the Egyptians tried their best to assimilate them, and assimilate means like bring into their kingdom, to bring them in, make them a part of the Egyptian culture. They attempted to do this, but it didn't last, and these settling communities ended up adopting Egyptian traits, cultural diffusion, but it ended up being their own kingdoms, right? So that's a big reason why Egypt was never able to rise back up to its prowess, right? It was never able to rise back to power because it was split into a lot of different smaller kingdoms, and the Egyptians wouldn't be reunified until the Greeks came in under Alexander the Great and actually conquered the entire area, right? So understanding this entire process is very important. And during these moments, when these new little kingdoms were popping up, when the Egyptians were at their weakest, when certain other groups were actually kind of like messing around, there was the rise of a new group. And that new group's name was the Phoenicians, right? So the Phoenicians are a very, very important organization, kingdom, cultural group. They started up during, let's actually find that out really quick. So following this entire idea, following the late Bronze Age collapse, out of everybody, this is one of the groups of people that was able to kind of weather the crisis, right? And they managed to emerge from this thing relatively unscathed, and they actually were a very solidly considered trade civilization by the 1230s. And the really interesting part about the Phoenicians is that they were unlike any other group of people that came before them. The Phoenicians were a society of sailors. They were a cultural group that originated off the coast of modern-day Lebanon. So we believe that they're right there in that northern region of the Middle East above modern-day Israel in this area known as Lebanon. And they became master shipbuilders, and they were never once conquered or enslaved by any of the mighty empires. Because remember, the Babylonians would expand and take over an area, and that's why Hammurabi created his law code to control that space. Sargon the Great and the Akkadians took over an area. Warlords in Mesopotamia are very important to understand, just like it was important to understand that the Egyptians increased their imperial activity during their New Kingdom period. No one was able to conquer the Phoenicians, though, because they just hop on their boat and sail away, right? So, they actually were never enslaved by anybody due to their master shipbuilding techniques. They actually could create large-scale vessels that could travel the entire Mediterranean with ease and carry trade items, right? So the Phoenicians are crazy important. This society of guys in boat shoes that, didn't really have a settled home. They kind of bounced around between multiple different city ports that they actually created all over the place. This one right here, going to become very important later, known as Carthage, is going to grow very quickly. But the Phoenicians' main prerogative was trade, right? We can't be taken over, we can't be enslaved if we are constantly living on boats and trading our wares in different areas, right? So they would literally move product all over the Mediterranean. And the Phoenicians, or where that word comes from, they did not call themselves Phoenician. The Greeks called them Phoenicians, right? So there were these archaic Greeks, the Spartans, the Athenians that were rising up. The late Mycenaean period was actually still there. The Trojans as well referred to the Phoenicians as purple people. That's where the word Phoenician comes from, right? So in Greek, Phoenician meaning purple people, referring to the fact that they had access to purple and blue textiles that no one else had access to. If you wanted to buy purple or blue cloth, the Phoenicians were the only ones that had it. That's why the Greeks called them purple people. And it's also why the cost of purple and blue cloth became so expensive that it became the color of royalty, because they were the only ones that had it. That's how capitalism works. Supply, demand. Demand was really high, supply is really low, makes it very expensive, right? So the Greeks were one of their most popular customers when they were on the rise, right? While the Athenians and Spartans and the late Mycenaeans are dying down and things like that, the ancient Greeks actually bought an excessive amount of stuff from them. And also, fun fact, this purple thing about the cloth, we're not positive how they made it, but apparently there are some historians that believe they made it from grinding up snail shells that they had access to and creating a dye out of that, right? But the Greeks, as one of their biggest customers, actually traded with them regularly. And also, cultural diffusion.
Yay! Yay!
It's also, they're going to end up trading with the fallen Egyptians, the kingdoms that moved into Egypt, the Mesopotamians, the Hittites, everybody. And so basically, the Phoenicians would, in an elemental way, be the key to the growth of Western civilizations, because without them, the interesting ideas of each culture would not have been spread throughout the Mediterranean and carried forward. And this right here is the biggest and baddest thing they've ever done. The Phoenicians are wildly important and no one gives them enough credit. They also invented something known as the phonetic alphabet to make communication easier with not only their own community, but as well as exterior communities. They actually invented this thing known as the phonetic alphabet. This is their largest impact. they traded with so many people that this concept of their alphabet was completely different from Egyptian hieroglyphics, Mesopotamian cuneiform. They invented an alphabet based completely on sound, right? So what they did is they basically created this alphabet depending on what the thing looked like, and they would say the sound that it made, right? So, for example, for Aleph, that is their letter Aleph. And that actually in their language, in the Phoenician language, meant ox, right? So that's the ox letter. And it had a very specific sound, this ah. And then Beth would actually have this sound, right? And Gimel would have a G sound. Daleth would have a D sound. Look at the similarity. The alpha A from Greek and Roman lettering is just their letter Aleph turned sideways, right? Their Beth turned into our B or our beta. Their delta turned into our D, right? So epsilon, our E. This is one of my favorite ones. H, they actually came up with the letter H to symbolize a fence, right? They were like, look, it looks like a fence. So we use our word for fence, heth, right? And the heth, that is the noise it's going to make whenever we say it. And that's why H looks the way it does. It's two posts connected by another post, right? So the Phoenicians came up with this alphabet to make it easier to communicate not only with their own vessels, but also with these other people. And it became so wildly important and popular that the Greeks and the Romans adopted this phonetic style alphabet. And it's why you're reading the things on the screen right now, because you know that G, R, E, E, K make a sound that goes together to say Greek, and you know the meaning of that word, right? Thank you, Phoenicians. Thank you for this phonetic alphabet. It's so flippin' important. But make me a new title. Make me a new title, okay? Due to the fact that I did not just dab. That was just like I promise I was not like this. All right. So now, anyway, but look, the children of Israel are going to be another major group that pops up during this time. So we're leaving the Phoenicians, and some are going to like, well, they were interesting when we just got there. Well, look. The Phoenicians have a bigger impact later on because they basically end up actually growing those little civilizations and those little cities into larger civilizations later on. And so they kind of end up assimilating into their own trade network. So that's all you need to worry about them for now, though, is their master shipbuilding, their purple textiles, and also their phonetic alphabet. So, but the children of Israel is a very important one because we interact with these people still on a daily basis, right? The children of Israel are mainly going to show up due to the fall of that group known as the Hittites, right? So the Hittites had expanded super far, taken over Egypt, leading to the start of their third intermediate period. And then, bam, here comes the Bronze Age collapse. The Hittites fell due to their weak leaders and inability to continue lead. The Egyptians are now also very weak in trying to deal with these different invading groups that are assimilating into their empire. This gave way to a ton of small, tiny little states being established, right? And one of the most important ones are these people known as the Hebrews, a.k.a. the children of Israel, right? So, or the Israelites, or the Jews, or the Canaanites, right? So it's something you need to understand when we're discussing Judaism and when we're discussing this entire idea is that they are a race of people. They are not just a religion. They are actually an ancient civilization that popped up as early as 1500 BC when they became completely constructed, right? So you're talking about being 1,500 years older than the birth of Christ, and they are going to make major headway because of their culture and also mainly their religion, because it has endured for that long, right? Now, the Jews have several different names. The Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, or the Canaanites, right? And we'll talk about all the reasons why they're called these things over time. But they have, as I said, multiple different monikers, right? You need to be ready for those different monikers, right? Multiple different names, multiple different ideas. Be ready for any of them. So this whole idea, though, is let's talk about where they were, where they came from. We believe that the Hebrews settled in what is now modern-day Israel. Right? So in 1500 BC. Now, if we're looking at that map real quick, where's my map? All right, so we believe that to show you some perspective, world map, D-maps. Where'd it go?
If there's a place you gotta go, I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map. I'm the map. I'm the map. If there's a place you gotta get, I can get you there, I bet. I'm the map. I'm the map. I'm the map. I'm the
Oh, thank you, map. Appreciate it. All right, so looking at this map really, really quickly, you have to understand where we're talking about, right? So we're talking about Western civilization emerging out of the Mediterranean during its each appropriate time period, right? So here's where the Phoenicians were founded in modern-day Lebanon. Here's where the Egyptians were along the banks of the Nile River. Here's the Tigris. Here's the Euphrates. Here's all your Mesopotamian city-states. This right here is where modern-day Israel and the Hebrews are going to pop up at, right? Because there may or may not be in time that you need to label the different groups on your test. I'm just saying. I might actually have a map and be like, who is this? Who is that? Who is that? And you might have to be like, oh, that's these people. That's these people. That's these people. So just be ready for that at any point in time. Now, the big thing, though, about this is where they're located, their perspective to Egypt, which is going to help lead to some of their Old Testament stories, and also it's just important to know where they are and why they actually still currently live there and have a nation there. So the big thing, though, also that they're going to come along with is where did they come from? A lot of people don't know where the Hebrews came from. Now, some historians believe that they actually were the Hyksos. Jot that down, that they were the Hyksos that invaded into Egypt and actually settled in the Nile Delta at one point and then were ran out, right? So there's a chance that the Exodus story might have actually been more of a war and less of like a Moses leading them outside of the Nile Delta, right? So the big thing about it, though, is we believe that when the Hyksos left Egypt, and this is, of course, according to some old school Jewish historians, one named Josephus, that a small group of Hyksos broke off and then became the Hebrews, right? And so the biggest thing about them that was wildly different is the fact that they believed in one God, one singular God. They were monotheistic, right? Now, this monotheistic God system is very important because, as you can see, maybe there were some chances that it was rubbing off, right? Akhenaten and Nefertiti tried to introduce monotheism to Egypt right after the Hyksos left, right? So what if the Hyksos actually believed in this monotheistic God, broke off, became the Hebrews, and cultural diffusion?
Hey.
So as you can see, the big thing about the Jewish God, though, at their point, is his name as well as also his functions, right? First of all, his name was Yahweh, right? So Yahweh being Y-A-H, W-E-H, I believe it's W-E-H, or it's possibly W-A-H. Double check on the spelling for me. So they believe that Yahweh is omniscient, which is all-knowing, omnipresent, which means exists everywhere, and omnipotent, which means all-powerful, right? So I really, really love to use hand signals for y'all, and it helps you remember all three of them. It goes omniscient, which means knows everything, so you got flashing hands right here. And then it's omnipresent, which is like this, because he exists everywhere. And then it's omnipotent, right? You're going to flex on him because you're the all-powerful, right? So then also, do not do that with your baby hands, Abby. I'd appreciate it if you did it without baby hands. Like, that'd be awesome. Now, really quick, though, the Hebrews believe that all history and events are related to their faith and that they're all interconnected. And each event is supposed to reflect God's chosen plan for them. That's an omnipresent man. Get it? He exists everywhere. So the big thing, though, also is that due to their views, they began to record all their ideas down in their holy book known as the Tanakh. Now, y'all have probably heard of a very other different type of holy book. I know for a fact one of y'all right now who's wicked smart, probably Mackenzie, who's just like so good at history, is probably like, well, I always heard that their holy book was called the Torah, right? It's like, well, actually their Torah is only 1/3 of this thing, right? Their actual holy book is a very, very large book known as the Tanakh, right? And it is very, very intense and includes many different volumes and stories. And when you actually add all the different books together, it creates the Tanakh, the actual contained whole holy book of the Jewish faith, right? So the Torah is 1/3 of it, which actually only includes mainly just like daily practices, life understandings, and also the book of Moses as well. So since you've heard about most often the Torah, it's actually just one part of that Hebrew Bible. So consider the book of Moses, but also the Torah included the 5 earlier books of the Old Testament, right? So the Torah includes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? And the entire Tanakh includes 24 books total in 3 separate parts or testaments, right? And you may or may not have encountered the Torah at one point in your life if you've ever been to a bar or bat mitzvah, right? So if you've ever been to a bar or bat mitzvah, then you've definitely encountered it before, because young men, when they are going through their bar mitzvah, and I believe young women, when they're going through their bat mitzvah, have to sing from the Torah as a part of this religious ceremony. But what we're going to do right now, I believe, is we are going to actually stop right there, and we're going to pick up on this stuff in class, and I'll talk to y'all later. Y'all have a good one.